Welcome into the PFF NFL Daily. Today, discussing the biggest discrepancies between PFF's draft board and the consensus draft board. This is a fun exercise every year, Sam. Our guy Arif over at The Athletic, he puts together the consensus board from many different sources. And then he sent us some of the differences between our draft board and what the masses are looking at. So let's go through some of the ones where we're lower on the consensus to start with Treylon Burks, the Arkansas wide receiver, who we've talked about quite a bit here as the guy that with the biggest discrepancy. We have him at 46. The consensus has him 18 points higher. 18
Yeah,
spots
and honestly, like this is just a reflection, I think, of Mike Renner in particular being a little bit leery about all the projection that needs to happen with Treylon Burks. I agree with him, but I get where other people would go in the other direction. I think Burks is a player that, to me, has one of the broadest ranges of where he could land in the entire, top end of the draft. He could go the middle of the first round, he'd go the middle of the second round, and neither one of those would make me bat an eyelid at all. In fact, I would probably agree with it. Like whoever took him, somebody takes him at 16. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. I can see the upside. I can see the playmaking ability. He's 225. He's fast. He, do all these things. And then somebody takes him in the middle of the low second round. I'll be like, yeah, I get it. He's got a weird, weird usage pattern in college. He's never really played true wide receiver. Doesn't run routes well. Weight concerns. You start focusing on all the negatives. So what I'm saying is, consensus or any individual take on Treylon Burks, I'm kind of on board with, no matter where it is.
Yeah, I'm with you too. No, spoiler alert too for today's PFF NFL podcast. When we have Nate Tice on there going through player comps, we have this same discussion about but this but we really like this, but we don't love that. And then Nate Tice throws his comp out there, and I'm just like, now I'm back in. I'm back in on Treylon Burks based off of Nate Tice's comp. But hey, look, he ran 4.55, but he's got good game speed, and he's at least shown a little bit of everything you want. But that's why, again, the consensus is all over the place as far as Treylon Burks goes. We can circle back to the ones where we're a little bit lower, but as far as higher than others, PFF type of guys, we have Aiden Hutchinson as number one. The consensus actually only has him at number two. We're a little bit higher on guys like Derek Stingley, the LSU corner, Charles Cross, the offensive tackle from Mississippi State, and then Bernard Ryman, the tackle from Central Michigan.
Yeah, Stingley, I think, is an interesting one to highlight. He's a guy that 2019, incredible season, one of the best college seasons we've seen at any position, but certainly for cornerback, showed that he has the ability to be a top tier NFL cornerback. The problem is that was 2019. We've had 2 seasons since then, and he hasn't gotten close to that level of performance between injuries and everything else going on. And for everybody else, I think that's tempering expectations, or people are focusing on the recency of what he's done lately, and that's not helping his cause. So the consensus board has Derek Stingley number 9 overall. And you'll see a lot of people have him even lower than that, obviously, in order to reach that consensus. But for PFF and Renner in particular to go out on that limb and say, no, look, what we saw in 2019 was so good that you can't drop this guy that far. He's too good. He's too talented. The potential is too high for you to get away from that. And particularly in this draft of all drafts with the relative lack of true superstar talent and ability, that guy deserves to be up there.
Yeah, Stingley's definitely an interesting guy just because we thought he was, Patrick Peterson and Jalen Ramsey as far as prospect, but he comes with far more question marks than they did because of everything that we've said and the lack of playing time and the injuries and all that stuff. But did we just go full circle essentially with Stingley, right? Like we were up on him and down a little bit, and then you saw the workouts and it's all right. He's back to where he needs to be. But yeah, I'd be fine taking that swing on Stingley just because of what he could become. Charles Cross, the other one, he's our number one tackle on the PFF draft board. Again, Mike Renner is the one mostly responsible for the PFF draft board, but that's our PFF consensus board. I think it's close between Charles Cross and Evan Neal in particular. But Cross looks like the cleanest pass protector. But my concerns with Cross, 1 year of really good production coming out of that Mike Leach system. But boy, does he move well. He's got good length and has everything you're looking for in that what the evaluators would call that true blindside protector.
Yeah, we're definitely a little bit higher on Charles Cross, and you articulate the reasons why. Bernard Ryman, I think, is a really perhaps it's a much bigger difference where we're higher on him relative to everybody else. We're higher by 20 draft spaces essentially relative to everybody else on Ryman. And again, he's another guy that it's a weird profile, right? He's relatively old, but hasn't played the position much. Was a tight end comes from a different country, relatively new to the game, plays tight end, moves to tackle, has basically only got a couple of years of play at that position, and yet his technique is really good. Like his fundamentals are sound for a guy that's so new to the position, and you have to kind of weigh, well, how do you juggle all that in terms of inexperience at the position, but being relatively old? All these sort of conflicting pieces of information, I think, are causing people to just be confused as to where you take him.
There's no conflicting information over at PFF.com right now, Sam. You can get 50% off a PFF Elite annual subscription using the code DRAFT50. You get 365 days of Elite. It'll get you PFF's locked article content, our NFL draft guide, which is over 500 pages, completely unlocked mock draft simulator, and much, much more. It's promo code DRAFT50 for 50% off a PFF Elite annual subscription. And also, don't forget, we get the podcast Hutch. It's a 4-part podcast series on the number 1 overall NFL draft prospect, Aiden Hutchinson, including interviews with Jim Harbaugh, current and former Michigan football players, key members of Aiden's family, media members, and draft analysts. Be sure to follow that on YouTube here or wherever you listen to these podcasts. It's a lot cooler looking at the players that we're higher on because we've mentioned some of these guys before. Guys like Sky Moore at receiver were 45 spots higher than the consensus. Renner put him up to 22 in the final draft board. I like it. We're big Sky Moore fans here. Tyler Smith, the tackle from Tulsa, who's an absolute mauler and is kind of like, the group of 5 version of Ike Ekwonu at tackle / guard. Nick Benito, a guy that we highlighted on yesterday's daily. Josh Paschal, another guy that we've highlighted before. These are guys that have graded well, performed well in our system, caught our eye from a scouting standpoint, and we're a little bit higher on than the consensus.
Yeah, I think which is always a nice place to be is to kind of lean on the production illustrated by the grading. Like ultimately that's going to carry weight and it's going to count for a lot. It's not everything, but it's certainly something that you want to focus on when it's there. And Sky Moore, I think, is the classic example of a guy who just has great production, great grading, great everything except that kind of special, everything except the thing that people lose the run of themselves about now, this kind of period, right? He isn't 6'3" and doesn't run a 4.3 flat and, has insane workout and measurables and all those kinds of things. So he gets lost in the shuffle a little bit while we focus on people like Christian Watson, who doesn't have anything near the kind of production and consistency that Sky Moore does. So I think it's good to keep hammering the drum a little bit for guys like Sky Moore that do tend to slip during this time of workouts and testing numbers in the underwear Olympics.
Tyler Smith, who I mentioned, is 51 spots higher. We have him as a first-round caliber player at 25. Really nice career at Tulsa. Nick Benito,
26 spots higher. It's 51 on the consensus board.
Oh, sorry. 51 by... I'm reading it completely wrong. I'm sorry. My apologies. It's still a big difference, though. Nick Benito's 54 on the consensus. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, now you're good.
I think he's a first-round caliber player. You broke him down extremely well yesterday on the show. Josh Paschal, who I said, the Kentucky edge defender, I think he's going to step into the NFL, be really good against the run with some pass rush upside. Abraham Lucas, another tackle, Washington State, from that system, always question marks there, but we have him high, and we've heard there are rumblings that he's a potential late first round or second round caliber player. This happens every year, Sam. There's a guy like Abraham Lucas, who I don't think any outlet maybe had as a first round pick and just kind of like shows up. Got Caleb McGarry a couple of years ago, the tackle to the Falcons, was kind of the same thing. Second, third round caliber prospect, I think, on most boards, who ends up going in the first. Sometimes I get tunnel vision on the guys that we have projected in the first, but a guy like Abe Lucas could actually sneak up there and go a lot higher than we think.
Yeah, and then the flip side of that is poor old Daniel Faalele from Minnesota, a guy that, the man mountain, 6'8", like 380 pounds or whatever he is, absolutely huge, but had one of the worst workouts of all time. Like, if you're going to be developmental type of prospect at that kind of size, you have to, at the very minimum, demonstrate the ability to move and just, be able to shift in space, not just be 380 pounds of obstacle for somebody to get around, and he couldn't. So unfortunately for him, Mike Renner in particular appears to have taken the absolute hammer to his draft stock and put him all the way down at 157 on our big board. This was a guy that was going at the tail end of first rounds in a lot of mocks, like right at the start of this process.
I think the problem here, because what you just described, though, was Orlando Brown Jr.'s workout. Remember, Orlando Brown Jr. had literally one of the worst workouts of all time, but he's turned out to be a very good NFL player. I think the difference here, Fa'alele's got okay production, peak grade of 82.3 at Minnesota last year. Orlando Brown had excellent production in college, so he had a much better foundation that's translated to the NFL. Anyway, let us know. What do you think of all the discrepancies between the PFF big board and the consensus board? It's the PFF NFL Daily.